Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, October 5th. We are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, Squalwin, Homish, Okanagan. I think, Council, you'll be happy to see what motion is not on here. M192. We're in a new era. So, adoption of the agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are on to staff reports. And our afternoon really is all about the budget. So I will turn it over to the finance team, Mr. Russell, to walk us through what we're going to talk about today. When you're ready. Mr. Russell, can we hear you? We just unmuted you from our end.
Okay, thank you. I could hear you, but I wasn't sure if you could hear me.
Now we can.
Thank you very much. I thought I was unmuted, but obviously I wasn't correct. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, executive, members of the public. We're here today on the 5th of October, 2021, to talk about the general fund as pertains to the 2022 through 2026 financial plan. This is our second of 4 planned financial planning workshops this fall, and we'll just get going. So today we want to talk about the general fund workshop, and so we're going to start right off the hop, tell you that for 2022 the estimated tax impact is $86 for an average residential home, and that equates to an increase of 3.9% year over year. Further to that, the other topics that we're going to talk about as we move through this workshop, we're going to talk about the change from short-term to a longer-term focus. We're going to talk about the comparison of costs associated with growth versus costs associated with inflation. We're going to talk about the impacts of capital construction on our debt servicing costs. We'll also highlight non-discretionary costs that we are experiencing and service level changes. Further to that, when we talk about change from short-term to a longer-term focus, as was outlined by our CFO, Ms. Boxrud, earlier in this process, we have revamped the 22 through 26 financial planning process to provide more information to council over the trends for the full 5 years, rather than just looking singularly at the next year. So historically, there has been a tendency to focus on an individual year, and now we're trying to expand that trend so you can see how various items are going to impact our taxes and our borrowing, etc., over a longer term. So this allows council to see a trend, allows public to see a trend, and so that they can understand better how our decisions are going to impact us. So earlier you saw a slide which showed that the 2022 impact was going to be about $86 per residential customer. When we talk about trends, I guess what we should point out is that over the 5-year trend, over the 5-year period that we are speaking of from 22 through 26, our analysis shows that the average increase per year is going to be about $65 for an average residential customer, based on the cost increases that have been outlined and included. Further, we would like to speak about different concepts. We want to talk about concept of growth-related drivers. When we speak of growth-related drivers, we'll go into greater definition of the specifics of these and outline some of them, but generally there are two. There are service level changes, and also there are growth that is related to non-discretionary costs. In addition to that, we have inflation-related cost drivers, and under the inflation-related cost drivers, primarily these are non-discretionary cost drivers, and you can see on the screen the increase impact here is approximately $6 per year. And lastly, we have the impact of capital construction.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes?
Mr. Russell, sorry. We just need to take a quick 5-minute recess to fix a technical issue.
Okay, I will pause.
So, Earl, if you could put us in recess for.
So.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Russell. We're back from recess, and I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Elliott. Apologies for our slight technical difficulties. I'll try to not repeat everything I just said. So, as we pointed out, it's going to be an $86 average residential increase, or 3.9% for 2022. To talk about future years, and at this point, we were saying that, or I was saying that it allows council to see a greater trend by looking at all 5 years as opposed to a single year. We also wanted to bring this information to council in its entirety. Historically, we've kind of brought it in pieces where we showed service level changes, and then we brought different projects, and then non-discretionary at different times, so council was unable to see the overall picture all at once. So again, this is a change in our methodology. I think that this is more effective, more efficient for both ourselves and for council as decision makers. Growth-related cost drivers in the plan for 2022, $63 and approximately 2.8%. We're looking at inflationary cost drivers, a relatively small amount of $6 or 0.3%, and capital construction of roughly $18 per year, or just under 1%. To be noted that all of these numbers that you see that are quoted here are for 2022 fiscal year, and as included in your package, you have greater information about impacts of service level changes in non-discretionary costs in the other years within this 5-year cycle. So from here, I'd like to go on and speak about non-discretionary costs. So when we talk about non-discretionary costs, I want to speak specifically about inflationary non-discretionary costs. And I should point out that we have four items, here for inflationary non-discretionary employment contracts, two types of contract changes, and we've broken out the RCMP specifically and to separate it from other. The reason that we've broken out the RCMP is the RCMP have recently signed a new contract with the federal government. And although we don't have all of the details on that contract, we would like to point out that they did unionize. The costs are going to go up. There are some increases over prior years, and there will be some back pay settlement involved. Fortunately, the District of Squamish has been prudent in their management of the RCMP contract, and we've managed to put away most of the difference between the RCMP contracted dollars and our actual expenditures over time. So we've built up a provision which will allow us to manage the change in the RCMP contract price year over year. So that puts us in a pretty good place. The other comment that I would like to make that's different from what you've seen in previous years is the last line there, which says tax stabilization. So these costs that we're referring to are inflationary and they're non-discretionary. And in prior years, taxes would be collected from residents, and we would have the intent to spend them on costs such as these: contract changes, employment contracts, other items within our normal day-to-day operations. And in different years, we would have variances and we would have costs that weren't completely spent. So for example, when we look at tax stabilization, we're going to refer to the 2020 year, and we're going to bring forward some dollars. And in this instance, we're looking at $700,000 from surplus in 2020. As is outlined in your report, the surplus that was generated in 2020, we had a small surplus at the end of the year, and as a result of being reimbursed, I guess would be the best term, by the provincial government through the BC COVID Restart Grant, we were able to put a significant portion of our additional funds into accumulated surplus. So we had a much larger annual surplus in 2020 than we would have otherwise. That being said, those cost savings are really there to allow us to offset future taxes. So they've been paid by previous taxpayers, and now we're going to use them to offset future inflationary increases to current and future taxpayers. So that's the idea behind tax stabilization. It is not something that we had historically used, but it is something now that we believe, with the increase in our capabilities associated with UBW and the ability to track our costs more effectively, we will be able to track our variances and our surpluses more accurately, and will provide us with the opportunity to use potential surpluses from previous years to help stabilize taxes in the future. So in this instance, we had a number of, significantly large amounts overall, for employment contracts and RCMP, et cetera, and they're offset by tax stabilization. That is depicted in closure attachment 1 of your package. Go on, and we're going to look at other non-discretionary costs. So other non-discretionary costs, there are growth-related non-discretionary costs. So growth-related non-discretionary costs are basically are two varieties. So the first is the annualization of service level changes. And by that we mean when council approves a service level change, and that service level change spans more than one fiscal year, we would put, for example, maybe half in year one and half in year two. So keeps the taxes down in year one, but there is a tax impact in year two. So as a result of that, that is a growth-related non-discretionary change. And the reason we say it's growth-related is service level changes are here to allow us to service growth. And this is a result of an increase in services. The other one that we highlight, because it is somewhat distinct, there are contract changes, and specifically contract changes associated with transit expansion. In 2020, 2021, council approved a transit expansion. That transit expansion was put on hold due to COVID and was delayed until the 21-22 fiscal year. And so now that transit expansion, which was originally planned for a year ago, is now going to come into play. The first portion of the expansion occurred in September, and the second portion will occur in January. So we're going to see an increase in costs in January of 2022. The other type of non-discretionary cost changes that we see are capital construction. Excuse me. And with respect to capital construction, we're attempting to subdivide our capital construction into two different pieces because we have two different areas that have different requirements, and we want to highlight them separately. So with respect to when we talk about capital construction, the impact here that influences taxes is the debt servicing component. So if a project is paid for with a combination of reserves and debt, the reserves are money taken from our savings account and therefore don't have a direct tax impact. The debt servicing does have a direct tax impact. So we've broken the debt servicing into infrastructure debt, which basically is stuff that's in the ground. So roads, pipes, that type of spending, diking, and debt servicing related to facilities. The reason that we want to highlight facilities is, as council saw recently, we have, with passing of the real estate facilities master plan, we've undertaken a number of major facility upgrades, such as new Fire Hall 1 in Valley Cliff, posing new structures for public works, and a second Fire Hall 2 to be built on Analyst Road. So as we increase and replace aged facilities, we're going to see a higher impact of debt servicing associated with facility replacement. So we wanted to split those two out so that council would and the public could clearly see the impact of capital construction. And so although this year's capital construction impacts were relatively modest, I think that they were at 0.9% and approximately $18. In the next couple of years, we're looking at fairly significant future impacts of capital construction. And the reason that you see fairly significant increases in capital construction impact is because within our current methodology, what we're doing is we're showing the financing of a project in year one. Year two, we then go to MFA, our financier, and we borrow the money. And then in year three, we start repayment. So there's a 2-year lag between when we put the debt in the bylaw, or when we put a project in the bylaw, and when we actually start the debt repayment. So, for example, although Fire Hall 1 is well underway, we can see very good progress on that project, we will not actually see the debt come into play for that project until 2023, because we won't borrow the money until later this year, early next year, and it won't be repaid or repayable until 2023. So keeping that in mind, you will see significant impacts in the future in 23 and 24 as the fire halls, public works, and the second fire hall come into play. You'll also see fairly high increase in infrastructure debt servicing in 2024 in your enclosures. And that is a result of a number of things on the infrastructure side coming together. The largest project would be Financ Sea Dike, but there are also a number of other smaller projects. And those smaller projects, in reality, we will have the ability to move the financing around a little bit and adjust the timing. But from a budgeting perspective, at this point, we're somewhat limited with just providing that 2-year time horizon. So if we're showing a project completing in 22, then the debt impact is going to occur in 24. That's what it's going to say on paper, but in reality, there may be more levers that will be available to the district to adjust the timing of that. Here we're going to go and we're going to speak to service level changes. Now at this point, I would like to take a slight pause and point out a couple changes that have been made to your package, the report package that you have. The first one is...
Mr. Russell?
Yes?
Councilor Race just has a question for clarification.
Sure, I will await your question.
Thank you. I actually have 2 questions related to what we just went over. And so I'm assuming that this might be a convenient time as opposed to waiting until the end of everything, but I can go either way, whichever works.
I could pause now if that is the wish and answer questions associated with the pieces that we have dived into so far on non-discretionary. I could stop sharing my screen and we could have a discussion if you would like. That'd be the wish of council.
So the first question is relation to tax stabilization. And I'm looking at the attachment 1, and it shows in 2022, 700,000. In 2023 and further years, it's 500,000. So that represents surplus. And I understand the goal of leveling out tax increases from year to year. But I didn't know that line item is new to me. At least I can't remember seeing it before. And accumulated surplus, from my perspective, is always, we have expenses of X, we tax for X, and then for some reason we don't spend that much money and it gets put into surplus in the next year. And the thing that surprised me about this is the apparent predictability of that number going forward. And is that consistent? I mean, what happens if one year we don't have a surplus? It seems to leave a $500,000 hole in our revenue, which we then would have to tax for in that year. And I was just wondering about that predictability aspect of it. Is that a consistent pattern? Are we taxing too much on things? Where is that coming from in such a predictable level?
Through the mayor, if I may address your question, Councillor Race, this could be a tag team one because I'm going to answer part of it. And if I don't finish it off, I'm hoping that our CFO will jump in and clarify anything I might have missed. The surplus that you see depicted here, that's from 2020. And so what we're anticipating is that any surplus that we might have, we'll be bringing it forward from a prior year, okay? So do we anticipate that we will always have surpluses? Well, truthfully, no, we don't. But one of the other things that we're going to be presenting to council later this fall is a package of information around our reserves and our reserve policies and our focus. And in that, you will see a depiction where we outline how we intend to use our reserves to allow us to stabilize rates in the future. Because in most years, because we're working with a 1-year lag with respect to this, we would have some idea by mid-late fall, this time of the year, whether or not we would have a surplus and potentially what level that surplus might be, and therefore be able to determine whether we would be adding to our accumulated surplus in any given year. Also, from that same perspective, whether that would provide an opportunity for us to use funds to stabilize rates in future years. So, for example, with respect to 2023, that's based on analysis that Finance Department has done on their results year to date for this year, 2021. And we're reasonably comfortable, given what has proceeded so far this year, that there will be a surplus and that we would be able to allocate some of that towards tax stabilization. In fairness, I don't think we can reach much further than 1 year out because I don't have a crystal ball. So I don't know what's going to happen in 2022. So I don't know how that's going to impact future years. But what we're projecting on this enclosure is that if we have surpluses in prior years, we would use that to stabilize our rates in future years. We're also anticipating that depending on where our overall reserve balances land, there may be sufficient reserves available to allow us to dip into prior surpluses, accumulated surplus, and use that to stabilize rates in future years. So no, we don't have a crystal ball. No, we're not presupposing that we are going to generate a surplus every year. We simply are looking at this. We know that we had a surplus in 2020. We can look at our results this year. We're feeling comfortable that there will be a surplus this year and that we will be able to use that to stabilize rates in the future. And we're going to have a reasonable level of comfort that there will be some funds available in our accumulated surplus that we could use for tax stabilization as we move forward. So it's a bit of I guess that's the best way to put it. We're not attempting to pre-tax. We're simply recognizing that if we have collected more than we needed, we should use those funds and give them back to the taxpayer, so to speak.
Thank you.
That addresses your question.
It does. And so in effect, although we put it going out in 2026, in reality, we're going to revisit that number every budget to make sure that we think we are confident for the next year only, really, going forward. So that does answer my question on that. The other question is with respect to the cost of financing these capital projects, and the fire hall example is a good one. The bylaw was last year. The work is going on this year, and the borrowing will happen in another year. So there's a 2-year lag. But who pays from what during that 2-year period? Because of course, work is going on, salaries are being paid, materials are being purchased. Is that short-term borrowing? Is that funded in some other fashion?
Through the chair, currently we're funding that through cash flow. We would anticipate that with a really large project such as the fire hall, which has a $16 million budget overall, we would use short-term borrowing. And so we anticipate that we will go to short-term borrowing potentially this fall or next spring, depending on how much we spent, what our cash flow looks like. And so for the larger projects, such as fire hall or public works or the other fire hall for that matter, second fire hall, I would anticipate that we would go to short-term borrowing in the interim if we deemed it appropriate. Partly depends on how quickly the project goes, how fast they can get it built, how quickly the dollars go out the door, and therefore, how quickly we would be able to go skip over short-term borrowing and just go directly to releasing a new debenture. But that is part of our plan. Our new financing scheme would be to use short-term financing, I should say, where necessary, to try to manage our overall cash requirements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I don't see any more hands, so let's move on to your next set of slides.
Thank you very much. There. Okay, I believe you can see the next slide. Okay, which says service level change at the top.
That's right.
Okay, so I had started this by saying we've made 2 changes in the report, and we want to outline those changes to council prior to getting into the body, so to speak, of the report. One is, with respect to the report, it states that the revenue is from building inspection, that there's $600,000 from building inspection revenue. And we apologize. It says from the building department. That should read from planning, engineering, and building. It is all 3 departments are going to see an increase in their revenue, and combined, the 3 revenue streams will equal $600,000. So the original print of the report, which suggested that we were going to get $600,000 from building inspection revenue, was incorrect. The second change that was made is there was some wording in the descriptions of the projects. And so with respect to the project around strategic leadership, there was some wording in there that referred to the project providing additional support for the mayor and the CAO. And we moved that wording because although the project service level change is designed to provide increased strategic leadership for the organization, that additional strategic leadership is not specific to the mayor or the CAO. So we just wanted to outline those changes that were made within the report. So there's a long list of different service level changes that have been proposed, and they are all contained in your package. They're contained in attachments 2, and then there's additional details in attachment 4, which speaks to the descriptions and the justifications. So at this point, I'm not going to go into the specifics of any of these items. What I am going to do is I'm going to pause at this moment for Ms. Glenday to make some comments with respect to the Public Safety Master Plan, and then I will continue on.
Thank you. Double checking, you can hear me. I wanted to bring to council and the public's attention the timing of the Public Safety Master Plan. So last year we received a draft and at the time implemented some of the recommendations, specifically an additional deputy fire chief. Since that time, staff, we are finalizing the report for council and the public, and that will be presented on October 26th. I appreciate that the timing is after this presentation on the service level changes. So what the service level change represents today is an earmark based on those draft recommendations. Once the fulsome report is presented to council at the end of October, of course, there is time for the public and council to ask questions, provide feedback, and for council to weigh in on the decision. So the line item that is there is an earmark, and we recognize that the detail that is behind that number will be provided October 22nd or 26th, sorry. It's a bit of a con in terms of, you know, we're doing a very good job. Finance has done a fabulous job of having the budget ready for theoretically adoption in December, assuming we follow our schedule. And what that timeline has done has crunched us with a number of presentations, and this one being one of the primary ones around service level changes. So we appreciate your patience, and just want to reiterate that it is a placeholder right now in terms of the dollar amount for public safety master plan.
Thank you, Ms. Glende. And at this point, I would ask if Gary Buxton would make some comments on our buildings service level changes. I will walk him through the presentation for that.
Thank you, Roland. I think you can, yeah, if we can advance to that slide. I'll address the building service level changes sort of more in aggregate rather than going through them individually. What you're seeing in the documents today is four FTEs, essentially 4 new FTEs and 2 position changes and reclasses that reflect sort of high levels of certification that are needed and a reassignment of responsibilities amongst the staff in that department to better align with what we're seeing in the building world today, which is certainly more complex permits and fewer of the smaller, less complex permits. So there's a shift. There are, however, no new, what we would say, people or faces that come from those 4 FTEs. They're all actually in the department working at present. 2 are covering staff leaves that we expect to end, or have. One's ended, one will end shortly, and the other 2 are funded through the COVID-19 relief grant for this year. Hence, they're back in the budget for permanent funding next year. And we do have offsetting revenues across the planning, engineering, and building departments. Next slide, Roland. The rationale that underlies the ask for those service level changes is increased building permit activity, generally increased building activity that we're having to deal with, increasing building permit complexity and more of the complex permits and fewer of the simpler permits, service level maintenance and maintenance of our review timelines, which were problematic last year and have improved. I'll come to that in a moment. Step code and sustainability elements of building review, those requirements have increased and will continue to do so. It's just getting more difficult to review the same structures, essentially. We have the pending wildfire DPA requirements that are on deck and awaiting a decision on the budget and the service level change. And there is pending program work for demolition and construction waste. We've started on a limited program for demolition waste management, but certainly if we want to get into construction waste management, we are going to need additional horsepower in the department. And to a degree, the certified professional program, which I'll describe in a moment. Next slide. So that's a review, that's sort of a brief chart. I know it's a little tricky to see, especially if your glasses don't work that well, like mine don't. But we've seen permits in the 150 to 160 range sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Now they're sustained levels of above 200, above 300 in certain cases. So permit numbers have increased and stayed fairly higher than they were 4, 5, 6 years ago. To date this year, we've got 158 or around 160 permits to the middle of June. So we're going to probably exceed some of those numbers again this year. Next slide, please, Mr. Russell. In terms of service levels, where we're at right now. Single family homes and simple building permits, they're down from 16 weeks into the 8 to 10 week range. We're targeting the 6 to 8 week range. Tenant improvements, small alterations are in the 6 to 8 week range right now, and we're targeting 4 to 6 weeks. Complex permits, there's a mixed bag of some of them take a lot longer. But we are getting to those in about 6 months, and then from that point, it depends on how complex and how difficult those reviews get. Those can move very quickly. Those can move very slowly, depending on the issues in that particular application. Next slide, please, Roland. In terms of the CP program, the Certified Professional Program, that's a program by which a developer or a builder would engage an architect and all the other consulting services, structural, mechanical, electrical, geotechnical, all of them, and they handle some or all of the work involved in reviewing and dealing with the building permit. Now, it addresses liability and accountability as well as workload issues. We are planning to bring this back to council in Q4 for the bylaw approval. It will, however, be a relatively small number of applications that go into the CP program annually, and those will be some of the large complex applications. We don't anticipate that this is going to have a significant impact on workload. It will help, but it's not the silver bullet that would eliminate our work in the building department. Any program needs monitoring, review, and oversight, no matter how hands-off or hands-on it is. And the options that will be subject to council approval are, there are 3, the Vancouver model, which is very hands-off. It is somewhat tied to their charter, so our ability to replicate that exactly is tricky. The Surrey model, which is where staff are much more involved, and then a blended or hybrid approach. But I say council will be reviewing and approving that later on in the year. Next slide, Roland. Fee increases, I say we've estimated fees for next year, and we've aggregated them across planning, engineering, building. Building permit fees we already adjusted earlier in 2021. So those are already in place. We're seeing fee revenue increases as a result. Fees in some cases, such as servicing agreements and building permits, are indexed to construction costs. So you're seeing continued increase in construction values, so permit values and permit revenue again. But we do anticipate that we will be producing a servicing agreement fee increase late Q4 or early Q1 2022. I think that might be the last slide, Mr. Russell. Is there another slide, Roland? Oh, you're on mute. That's a summary of the building changes.
Now, I'd like thank you very much, Mr. Buxton. Continuing with our discussion of service level changes, another grouping of service level changes was considered service level maintenance. Service level maintenance refers to projects which are required to maintain the existing services, but require additional staffing primarily. And so as such, we would bring any increased FTE requirements to council for their approval. And you can see there are a number of them that are outlined here: workforce planning, facilities support, building inspection support, which is related to the previous discussion that was just held, but more minor. Also, some related to public works for both roads and parks. And I think the key element with respect to that, with respect to service level maintenance, is that we've also included anticipated future requirements for Oceanfront Park. And the reason that we included additional requirements for Oceanfront Park that are anticipated to commence in 23 and into 24 is because these parks, this Oceanfront Park and Waterfront Park also, are being developed by developers. I know the word developed too many times, but they're building them. And once they are complete, they're going to turn those over to the district. And once they turn them over to the district, they will become our responsibility to maintain. Both of these parks are large and they are complex, and they are going to require significant increase in our staffing because they are not that close to our main hub for park support, which would either be at the Public Works Building or at Brenham Park. So they're going to require additional support that would have to be located closer to the downtown area. In addition to that, last but not least, we're looking at projects transferred from operating. What we're referring to here is there are a number of projects that we have been included generally in the operating project listing that really are more directly related to operations and maintenance and repair functions that we perform on an ongoing basis than they are to actual special operating projects. So to rectify that situation, what we've done is we've shown those as a reduction in the cost of operating projects and an increase in the service level change. The reason that they're being presented as service level change is that we're saying to council, we're going to increase the overall operating budget of these departments by $375,000. At the same time, we're going to decrease the amount of tax that we take to apply to projects operating, potentially capital, by the same amount. So although it shows a 1.2% increase in our service level change, it does not actually increase the amount of taxation that we're currently getting from our residents. So they're already paying for these projects. We're simply moving them from the special operating budget or capital budget into operations. I think we're getting towards the end of this overall presentation, so I would like to speak to a couple things here related to future years service level changes. So with respect to items that we know are out there, that are coming, but that we have not presented to council and do not have council's direction to include in the existing plan. So, for example, all of these items commence in 2023 and future years, but additional costs associated with public safety master plan, additional costs associated with workforce planning. We currently have struck an agreement with West Wind Seniors Hub to lease space within their facility, which we believe will open in late 22 or early 2023, and provide programming. So both the costs of the lease, long-term lease, and the costs of the programming have not been included in the budget yet because they are future costs. In addition to that, you'll see that included in your package are costs for municipal offices lease in 2025 and costs associated with transit maintenance facility in 2026. And we thank council for providing direction to the administration on the last two items to include those in our 22 through 26 financial plan. Unfortunately, due to the timing, we were not able to translate that into having those included in the future service level change calculations. So although they're in the plan, we're showing them to you. They are not part of the numbers that you see in your enclosures when you're looking at attachments 2 or attachment 3. These items that you see in future years service level changes are not included in there. We've tried to give you the overall picture of what's going to happen this year. So we projected out some numbers based on project costs. And those project costs are based upon the recommendations that administration have provided. And we will be discussing those with council at future workshops in October for special operating projects and capital projects. The last item that we'd like to speak about is non-market change. Non-market change relates to or refers to revenue from new assessment or growth in assessment. And what we have done is we have estimated this level to be 3% for 22. And because we have been seeing strong market growth in recent years, we're estimating 3% for 2023 also. After that, to reflect the fact that development, although it has been strong, is not guaranteed, we have reduced the non-market change estimate to 2% for 24 through 26. We're applying this revenue to fund growth-related costs because we're working from the concept that non-market change, the revenues from non-market change, that's money we're getting from new residents or new assessment, new building, new development. And we think that it's appropriate that that new development, which is growth over our existing base, the funds we get from that should be used to fund growth in our costs as we go forward. So we're applying the non-market change against service level changes and netting those two values out. That is a presentation that I have to provide to council today. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, which says council discussion. Then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow us to discuss this, and you can ask any questions that you might have of finance or our executive team, and we will do our best to answer you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. We'll start with Councillor Race.
Thank you. And this is directed to you, Mr. Buxton, and it's just with respect to the CP program, the Certified Professional. When I look at the wait times for permits, the one that really strikes me is the complex projects for 6 months. And I have talked to some developers where that's been a real problem for them because in effect, it's cost them a year because they don't want to start the project at the wrong time and so forth. And the CP project, I'm wondering, I understand there is a presentation coming and I don't want to get into too much detail on that, but is it primarily directed at that particular part of the people coming in for permits, or is it more or less across the board? Would you ever use it for a single family home, for example? And secondly, from a budget perspective, might it have any impact on the fees that we might expect for this department as well as the other departments?
Thank you. Through the mayor, to the first question, the answer is yes. It's almost exclusively going to be for the large complex permits, and it will help expedite those developers that choose to use the CP program. It's not particularly easy for them to do it. They have to get certified through the province. So again, we don't anticipate that it'll have a significant impact, but it will. For those that do decide to use it, it could certainly very quickly move permits through the process for them, allowing others then to sort of shorten their timeline. But yes, it's a complex permit process almost exclusively. And on the second one, yes, it may have an impact on our fees, but again, if it's a half a dozen or so applications a year, we don't anticipate that that's going to be significant.
Thank you. And I had a second question, unrelated, and it's with respect to the service level changes. And when I look at the schedule that we're given, the one that jumped out at me was the number provided for career firefighter number 10 on that particular schedule. And it shows an annualized cost of $98,400. And that struck me as low, just from memory. And I wondered if that's accurate, or does it include benefits? Is there something that's missing there? I would have expected a larger number.
Through the chair, the estimate that we provided there at 98,000 roughly does include benefits. And the reason that it appears so low is that the firefighters have a scaled price mechanism. So when you start as a firefighter, your base salary is around $70,000 to $73,000 a year. And so when you have benefits, it comes out somewhere just under 100,000. We generally think the firefighters make much more money than that. Well, yes, they do, but that's only after they, have some level of experience and have moved up the scale somewhat.
Just to follow up on that, though, is it a full year position or is it a partial year position?
The $100,000 that is quoted is for a full year for a starting firefighter. So at the second level of the firefighter grid, we are anticipating that this position would be hired in April, so it will be 9 months of the year.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, a few questions. First, to Mr. Buxton, I was a little bit confused in one of your slides when you said that there would be no new people or faces per se, that 2 of the FTEs will be kind of carrying on from existing staff leaves, but that does mean that you're increasing the staff by 2 FTEs because those other staff will be returning. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And so we've been able to reduce our wait times quite significantly, and kudos to the team for doing that with the existing FTE that we have currently. And so what is the rationale for having those 2 additional FTEs, given that we've been able to reduce our wait times to 6 to 8 weeks?
Well, one of them specifically is the wildfire DPA. That is, we've identified that for the last 9 months, that that program needs an FTE. The remainder is contained in, I say, the rationale applies across the department. We've got more work, it's more complex work. We have other pending programs around construction waste, and files are more complex. And if we want to get those wait times down to where we want them to be, we think that's the FTE count we need in the department.
So that would be lowering the wait times below the current 6 to 8 weeks.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Another unrelated question, Mr. Rowland, I appreciate the rationale when we talk about non-market change and growth paying for growth, but in the staff report to council, there's still a net tax impact from growth that's almost 3%. And I'm just curious how we've landed at that with the rationale that growth should pay for growth, but we're still seeing almost a 3% increase on existing taxpayers.
Through the chair, 2 things. One, it would be wonderful if growth came along at the same time as increasing costs came along. but growth doesn't always do that. What we're seeing here, what we're experiencing, and Councillor Stoner, I'm quite sure you're aware of this. Over the past number of years, the district has had to implement a few different measures, such as workforce planning, to increase its ability to meet the demands of growth. And in prior years, we had taken the additional revenues provided by non-market change and use that revenue not to increase our expenses, but to reduce our taxes. So what we're doing here this year, we're playing a bit of catch up, because in the past we've used non-market change as a methodology to smooth taxes rather than as a methodology to pay for growth pressures. And so over time, what we've seen is that our growth pressures have continued because, as Mr. Buxton pointed out, as our workforce planning, has pointed out, we kind of got a little behind in our ability to keep up, and the community has been growing rapidly, and so we've had to increase our expenses. So at this point in time, we're kind of playing catch up, and it's not going to happen in every year that non-market change will pay for growth exactly. Some years you'll be higher, some years you'll be lower. We're using this, we hope, as a concept that we would like to be able to use the non-market growth that we generate in any given year to offset the costs, our tax increase costs associated with growth. And there's going to be years where we catch up. There's going to be years where we're ahead and non-market change is higher, and we'd be able to use that either to spend a little more or to reduce people's taxes. So it's not an exact science. This is a change in how we have approached balancing growth with our revenue streams. And we acknowledge that, in this specific year, it doesn't look like non-market change is going to pay for all the growth. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And then I had just one last question, Chair, about the tax stabilization that Councillor Race was asking about earlier. My understanding in previous years was we actually applied accumulated surplus to elements of the budget that were actually less operational in nature, or things that we wouldn't see year over year, because we couldn't actually count on that being there on an annual basis. I get the sense that we're kind of shifting that theory and methodology here, where we're actually applying it to something that, like an inflationary cost, which we would expect to happen on an annual basis. And so what risk does that put us at in future years, knowing that we might not be able to count on that accumulated surplus for tax stabilization?
Through the chair, it does put us at some risk. I think that the way that this program has been devised, the risk is minimized by the fact that there is a time lag between the year that we're reviewing to determine whether or not there is a surplus and whether that surplus could be applied to future years' tax stabilization. So in this instance, we're using 2020 results, which we know now, and we would be able to assess whether that's available for 2022. So if we're always keeping that 1 year lag, we would know realistically fairly well in advance if we're going to come up against the year where there would not be much ability to use tax stabilization in this methodology. So one would anticipate that administration or staff would adjust their requests accordingly if we saw that we would not be able to use previous funds to stabilize future expenses. And I'm going to defer to our CFO at this point, because I think she has something she'd like to add.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, through the chair. So just a bit of a background on this as well, that I think it'll add a bit more context is in previous history, and quite a ways back, there wasn't a appropriate working capital that was established. So depleted reserve, depleted working capital. So for several years, working capital, so unappropriated accumulated surplus, has been accumulated over the years to get to a good cash flow basis. Now, what we've been talking about recently, and we've brought it to council a couple times now, is the idea around this general operating reserve. So what that'll do, will add enough funds or thresholds that we can put aside for our working capital, that we can put aside for our any emergencies, human resource contingencies, legal contingencies, that kind of thing. And then after that, anything that we have in surplus, we can then use. So what we're anticipating through this analysis is that we'll have those established thresholds. And then after that, we can use a reasonable amount of any surpluses that occur to stabilize tax. So that's sort of the shift in methodology that we're at, because we do feel that we, through this analysis, have come up with enough working capital. Unappropriated accumulated surplus is the other term for that. So I hope that helps add a little bit more context in the history of where we were and where we're going now.
Thank you. Council, more questions? I can't imagine that we're done. Councillor Herford and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. The under service level changes, the Affordable Housing Society with $135,000 coming from other funding, and I just wonder if someone could where that is. I'm excited to see it there, but
through the chair, the funding for the affordable housing program, the increase is coming from the Affordable Housing Reserve. Our intent is to, the total program costs are approximately $210,000 currently, and our intent is to phase out that $135,000 subsidy over a couple of years. So this year, we would not have a direct tax impact, and then we would reduce that subsidy from the Affordable Housing Reserve by about 50% per year over the next 2 years. And so in that way, by 2023, by 2024, the full amount would be tax funded. And we've done that in an attempt to provide, one, stability to an affordable housing scenario, and also to provide them with a bit of an opportunity to get established and get to a point where they might be able to provide additional funding for themselves. So that's where we're at this point. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. An item under the service level changes in the Public Works section, number 22, parade support, piqued my interest. I'll read the description. RCMP now require heavy equipment at all parade route intersections to prevent terrorism attempts. My question is whether you may be able to elaborate further, or staff may be able to elaborate further on what specific heavy equipment may be required. The item is not large. It's a $13,700 total cost, but the context of the RCMP requirement piques my interest. Would you be able to offer further explanation of the type of equipment that's going to be deployed here? Thank you.
Yes, through the mayor, I can address that. The RCMP's enhanced security protocols around events just require heavy duty vehicles. So it would be whatever we can provide, whether it's trucks or other heavy equipment to block intersections during events.
Thank you.
I guess I'll pass on a comment. I cannot imagine that the 3 or 4 parade festivals that we host each year on Cleveland Avenue would be recognized by the RCMP anti-terrorism folks or CSIS as terrorism risks. And if this is going on across Canada, perhaps it belongs in a kind of a basket of new cost items, RCMP requirement cost items that might deserve attention in some forum. We have earlier this year discussed the new cameras that our police officers will wear and the costs associated with that. But it just piqued my interest that this is now an RCMP requirement and probably in everywhere from Drumheller to Sackville. So that's what piqued my interest, but that's just a comment at this time. Thank you.
It's more than a comment. Do we have, is this a download that hasn't been announced publicly?
No, I just got a note from Mr. Smith. It actually is just for the Canada Day event. Perhaps
on whose mandate, Mr. Buxton? Like, where is this coming from? Whose mandate? Like, where did this come from?
This is a request from the RCMP to provide support during that event.
So is this a detachment level request, or is this a Lower Mainland District request, or is this an Ottawa request?
That would require I don't know if Mr. Smith is available to answer which particular hierarchy of the RCMP is making this request. I don't know, but
Okay, if we could get that information.
Yep.
Councillor Anderson, do you have a follow-up question? Councillor French?
Oh, thank you. It's along the same lines, and maybe whoever Mr. Buxton is reaching out to would answer this as well. From the response of heavy vehicles, what I have envisioned in my mind is like district dump trucks. Is that the type of heavy vehicle that's being envisioned parked at our intersections during civic parades?
in all likelihood, yes. It could include any of the heavy equipment that we have to block intersections, and we don't know if it's coming from anywhere higher than a local RCMP requirement. I mean, we can certainly find that out.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I appreciate the clarification on why we don't see the service level increases in future years. I'm sorry, I missed the piece. Are we expecting at a future meeting to get some projections for those numbers?
Through the chair, Mayor Elliott, to answer your question, Councillor Pettingill, we provided the dollar figures on attachment 2. We've not included specific percentages for those dollar items in future years, but we could suggest that based on the 2021 tax take of $32 million, that somewhere $320,000 is going to equal 1% in the current year, and that's going to go up slightly as we move forward. So we might suggest that would add slightly more than 1%. The numbers shown on the attachment in 2023, and I believe that we provided some additional information with respect to the facilities costs for the lease at Municipal Hall, and I think the projection there was 2.4%, and the projection for BC Transit was 1.4%. And, you know, we did not want to seem presumptuous by including those values, nor did we feel it appropriate that if we put percentages associated with that, we did have some concern that they would be at the bottom of the page, and that would be what was picked up rather than what is actually being proposed, which does not include those future projects.
Thanks, and I can appreciate that. Although to be honest, I mean, I really like the idea that we're looking at the whole picture and doing the best we can to project out to a 5-year plan and understanding that. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I'm trying to wrap my head around the things that we're starting to talk about now that we're planning in these next 5 years. Do they make for service level changes that are on par with what we've seen in the past? Are we doing better? Is the realistic picture that service levels are going to rise higher than normal for the next little while? And I guess I'm just trying to get an understanding of that.
Through the mayor, I think it would be a fair answer to that question would be, we're looking currently at a 3.9% increase in 2022. And our projections today are showing that going up by about a half point each year in 23 and again in 24. So, we're already above 4% at this point in our projection. It would, staff's not going to presuppose what level of tax increase that council is comfortable with, or the public is comfortable with. And so we could give you a range of what those additional costs might reflect. Okay. But at the end of the day, that's up to council to decide that they are willing to add those costs to a specific year, whether it be 23 or 24 or 25, and direct staff to include those projects, in which case we would. So at this point in time, we're kind of looking at a 4%, something around that, or a little higher potentially over the next 3 years. And those are just including projects and costs that we're aware of today that council has authorized. We recognize that the costs may need to go higher if necessary, if council wants to bring in all the various items that have been proposed. So we leave that to council's discretion, and we count up the numbers. We're going to let you make the tough decisions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell. I'm curious because we have a delegation from Quest University this evening. They're seeking to change their legislation so that they don't need to pay their property tax as was in the past. What assumptions are we making? Because that impacted our non-market change quite substantially last year. So what assumptions are baked into this year?
We are aware that Quest may come forward to make that request. We're also aware that if they approach the provincial government to have their charter rewritten and they are granted an exempt status, that they would basically go back to where they were previously. One of the reasons that we have used a 3% non-market change factor in this year, even though last year we saw very significant non-market change in the year before the same thing, is we were anticipating that we could lose up to 1% plus of non-market growth this year due to that change in Quest. So we decided that it would be better to have a rather lower estimate than what development cycle might suggest. We were anticipating the potential for this to come forward, and so we have used a slightly lower number. We also anticipate that this will also filter its way through the actual general assessment change. So it won't be shown, quote, as a non-market change. It will just lower the general assessment if Quest were to be successful. So those two things combined, we've deemed it prudent to use a lower value of non-market change for 2022. I hope that
Thank you.
answers your question.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Buxton, do all the positions added in the building department, you said, are covered by fee increases?
That's correct, yes. Oh, yes, that also includes the fee increases also cover the salaries of the environmental and the development engineer as well. So there are those two as well.
Okay, and then we're reclassifying some so that we have a higher skill level. So depending on the decision we make at the end of the year on a certified professional program, how many level 3, level 2 do we need? Like when this building plan reviewer level 3, is that because we have one now, or will we end up with 2?
Sorry, I do have that chart. It didn't make it into the presentation somehow, but we end up with 2 level 3 officials, 3 at level 2 and 2 at level 1. So 2, 3, 2, 3, 2 in terms of from higher to lower levels of building certification.
Okay, thank you. One of the descriptions talks about the number of trees and soils permit requests coming in. So is that a problem with the bylaws? We've established it so that we're getting too many? Or is it sitting at the right level? Like, are we getting people that are needing to do minor work that really shouldn't be captured by this permit? Or is it actually hitting the right level that we were seeking?
That's a bit of a difficult question. I mean, one of the options is to adjust those bylaws to lessen that workload, but we still think there would be a need for another position in that department. It is getting completely swamped with enforcement issues, trees and soils permits, reviewing DPA1, riparian permits. It is getting increasingly difficult to maintain levels of service. We have had retention issues in that department. So that department desperately needs additional resources to simply maintain service levels. We could help by upping the thresholds in those 2 departments, but it wouldn't solve the problem on its own.
Is the DPA1 an opportunity to look at another certified professional program so that our staff aren't reviewing things that are approved by DFO and the province in terms of fishery and riparian area? So, like, are we doubling up on work for some of these complex projects that could be done just by a certified professional with the developer signing off on it?
There's no CP program that operates in the riparian realm yet.
But we could create one through our DPA, could we not?
It would be difficult to do, but nothing is undoable. It will be a lot of work to create that program.
It just seems strange that when DFO approves something and the province approves something, that we then have to then approve something because their jurisdiction supersedes ours. So on these big complex projects, that's why I'm wondering if that's something we need to take a look at going forward. Because we're creating work.
We deliberately set our environmental, a municipality can set whatever standards as long as they meet the riparian area regulations, they can set whatever standards that exceed those. Ours deliberately are set to exceed those standards. So there is a role for review. A CP program would be very difficult to do, but not impossible. But we have set our standards high. Again, if we want to adjust our the thresholds for what we review, we can lessen the workload that way as well.
My next question is for Mr. Pagely, and I see that a position that we funded through the BC Restart program, you're suggesting should be permanent, but council hasn't seen an update on the summer visitor management program, how it went. So when will that happen so that we know whether this is the right way to place our funds or whether we should be doing something differently?
Through the chair, Mayor Elliott, are you referring to the Visitor Camping Management Coordinator seasonal?
That's correct.
The report will be coming forth in the next several weeks. The final report, we're just bringing together the data from the seasonal activity, and that particular position to date has proven to be part of the success of our presentation we're bringing forward as we were looking at how to manage visitor traffic management and coordinate activities. But the report will be brought forward in the next several weeks prior to budget being approved finally.
So this would be a placekeeper as well.
Correct.
And then is there offsetting revenue for the bylaw positions or the community, what do we call them?
Patrol
Community
officers?
patrol officers, like through ticketing or that sort of thing?
To date, there hasn't been a net offset because primarily their work has been around education and awareness, and compliance has been quite strong. So there isn't a direct correlation between revenue and those two new roles.
Other questions? Councilor Rice?
Thank you. And it's back to the RCMP. And I note in the report that you indicate, and you mentioned it in your presentation, we're anticipating an increase in 2022 of 137,000 and 270,000 in 2023 due to the contract that they're dealing with the union. So could you tell me, do you know off the top of your head, does that represent 1% or 2% or 1.5% or 3%? Just to give me some idea of the amount of raise that we're anticipating.
Through the chair, Councilor Race, you kind of put me on the spot. Usually I'm pretty good at math, but I'm struggling a little bit here. What I'm going to suggest is the 2.7%, the $270,000 is roughly 5%. Going to suggest it's more or less $270,000 on 5.2 million. So okay. I'm going to suggest that that's about 5%.
Yeah, and I was just wondering because I don't know that we have, from everything I hear in the municipal world, we don't quite have certainty on that yet. And so if it came out as a higher number, either of those two numbers, do we have other ways of dealing with it apart from just adding it to taxation?
I'm can answer your question, yes, but I see that our CAO would like to interject, so I'm going to pause for a moment to see if Linda wanted to add something here.
Thank you. Through the chair, just for clarity, the two numbers this year is the retroactive pay for the contract increase. And then going forward, and the contract actually only goes until the end of 2022. The specific percentages, 23, pardon me. We can provide the specific percentages. I don't have them up right now. So I just wanted to indicate that it's a retro amount as well as most of the contract on the collective agreement.
And just, if I might, just for my clarity then, so when we're talking retroactive, that would be, normally that's the catch up to the present date. And then is it increasing beyond that, or possibly increasing beyond that this year or next year?
Yes, it is. So it also captures the increases for 2022 and 2023. And then as years go on, similar to any other collective agreement, it's very likely that wages will continue to increase. So the largest payment that you're seeing in our current budget now is that catch-up, the retroactive, the collective agreement, as well as the increases. So future increases won't be on the same scale. The amounts that are currently in our budget for this catch-up and increase are coming out of a provision and not tax payable.
Thank you.
Councilor Pettingill?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask about the school zone center line sign maintenance. And, I understand that people are appreciating the perceived impact at least, and there is still concern about speeding and traffic in neighborhoods. I've just also been watching some videos about sort of most effective ways to calm speeds on streets. And, the suggestion is just that signs aren't very effective. It's really about street design. Where I'm going with this, I know that street design can be expensive, but this seems like a lower cost and appreciated way of dealing with this. So what I'm wondering, is this enough of a budget to just sort of replace exactly what we have, or should we be looking at something that allows us to experiment a little bit more and use this more broadly to adjust our street designs to bring down speeds beyond just the school zones? And so has staff given that any consideration? Is that something we might see in a future year? Or, with a slight tweak to this budget, could we do a little bit more experimenting and see if there's something a little more resilient that, again, is maybe more broadly applicable?
Yes, is the answer to your question. We can always do more if you want to increase the budget. I would suggest the increase there is simply into the signage budget in the Public Works Department, rather than to this specific item. That will give us more leeway to do all sorts of what we call street furniture related items. That wouldn't give us cover for doing active transportation or other improvements, but there are budget items elsewhere in the engineering department that cover those issues. We've got $100,000 per annum for road improvements, non-vehicle related, in the engineering department. So there's budget there for items like that as well. So yes, more money will get you more things, but I think it would be better in another line item if you want to increase that.
Okay, maybe I'll think about that a bit. I guess what I'm looking for is a cost-effective way to help with the speed in neighborhoods, understanding that signs themselves seem challenging. Anyways, I'll take that and think about it. Thank you.
I think the project that we have that Ms. Gunn is working on in terms of the community-wide speed reduction program is by far the best project we could do in that regard. Yes, speed is lethal in vehicles, so that would be the biggest bang for our buck if we could get that back on track.
But to follow up on Councilor Pettengill's question, do we have data that showed that putting those centerline signs in slowed people down? Because in previous reports, staff have said that the thing that works best is the speed sign that moves around the community. And maybe we just need more of those electronic, this is your speed and you're in a speed zone. There's one on Buckley Avenue right now. It's been very effective at slowing people down. So I think your question is, like, what's the most effective in our toolbox that we're using now? And did the centerline signs do anything?
We have no data on the centerline signs. If we wanted to move that funding for the movable speed signs, that's an option that council could consider. I'm not quite sure what 15,000 would get us. I don't know how much those signs are. I mean, if we're going to move the money, it would make sense to move an amount that's useful. Oh, I got an answer. It would get us one more movable speed sign.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I guess maybe this is for a speed topic with Miss Gunn, and I'm actually thinking more of things like just yellow barrel filled with sand or water in the center lines to narrow the streets a bit, and so something more cost effective. And do we have the sort of budget to maybe experiment with things like that in more places? But anyways, maybe that is a separate discussion.
More questions? Councillor.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing something here. So when I look at attachment 3, which shows the bottom line at the top schedule is a 3.9% increase for the average residential property. So is that it? Are we missing something here? And what I'm thinking about is things that we normally spend a lot of time debating, and that's things like paving contract, contributions to capital, special projects, and so forth. Is that still to come on top of this number? Or is that somehow captured by these numbers?
Through the chair, we have estimated projects, both operating and capital, and we will be presenting those projects operating on the 19th, I believe, and capital on the 26th. But yes, the impact of those projects has been included, and we are showing a slight reduction. It is suggesting a slight reduction in costs associated with projects year over year. So yeah, the 3.9% that we are saying today includes all of the recommendations from staff for the 2022 budget at this point.
CAO.
Thank you. And just for clarity, the 3.9% increase is the year-over-year revenue increase in total, and the average impact to the residential property is $86.
But just to follow up on that, and I did misstate that, CIO is correct, 3.9% revenue increase. But the things like, for example, with special projects in previous years, at least, we've gone through a debate about what's priority of some projects and the next projects are on the waiting list and so forth. And is that contemplated? Are there things beyond what staff has recommended? Is there sort of a parking lot list of things that we might approve or not approve of?
Through the mayor, the answer to that question is yes. We do have a list of projects that have been reviewed by staff and prioritized, and for lack of a better way to put it, we drew a line and said that's how much money we have, and these are the projects that we're recommending that are above the line, and there are going to be some projects that are below the line. For both operating and capital, that information will be presented to council in upcoming workshops, and council will have the opportunity at that point in time to weigh in on whether they agree with the recommendations of staff or not, or whether there are projects that they would like to add, there are projects that they would like to delay or otherwise. So we're looking forward to that, but based on the analysis that staff has taken with respect to the projects that have been presented by our managers, the number that we have shows a slight reduction in the tax impact of projects from 2020 to 2020. Sorry, from 2021 to 2022. And that slight reduction is incorporated into this 3.9% that you are seeing. But yes, you will have an opportunity to adjust those values as you see fit.
I just have a question about the transit expansion, and it says the transit expansion includes 3 vehicles because we need a number of reserve vehicles. I'm wondering, are we purchasing new buses to be reserve vehicles? Are we purchasing buses to replace our existing buses, which then become the reserve vehicles? It wasn't clear. It just, the way it's written, it sounds like we're buying new buses to sit.
Yes, I'm hoping that Mr. Wickham can answer
Yes.
that question. Oh,
Yes, well, I'm here to not quite answer the question, I suppose. The buses will be supplied through BC Transit. I believe it was only 1 for this year and 2 more for next year. I may not have that right. But yes, they're required as the number of buses goes up in order to have some on standby for maintenance issues, et cetera. We're required to have a certain number of standby buses. Whether those are brand new buses or not, I'm not able to answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, if we could find that out for next time, that would be great.
Yes, we will be in council in 1 week's time with BC Transit in tow, so that's a good time to clarify that.
And then on the creating permanent positions for folks that worked on the TTP project, the manager of business applications, the description says see business case worksheet, but we didn't get that worksheet.
Our apologies for our missing that line. The business case was presented to executive team, senior management, so that senior management could make a decision on whether or not they wish to proceed with including the position. And so the C business case should have been removed prior to the documentation being presented to council. So our apologies.
I don't want to apologize. I actually would like to see the business case. We've seen them before for other large purchases, and this one sounds compelling, but it would be great to see that detail. Given that we've spent millions on this project, we want to maintain it. And so I think it would be interesting for people to see how much we would be spending on consultants versus simply hiring a position.
Okay, we will take that under advisement, and I'm sure that we can work with the director of IT and the director of TTP to provide that.
So, council, we will get to see the service level changes again because there's some positions that are earmarked here, or we haven't seen the reports yet. But this is your opportunity to highlight any information you need to be able to make a decision the next time service level changes come before us. So if the information isn't in this package that you need to make decisions on all these service level changes, today is your opportunity to ask staff for the information you need. So I'll let you think about that. I saw Councillor Stoner's hand, but we're not getting multiple endless kicks at this can if we want to get to the December 31 approval date. So this is the day, and if there's anything around specific positions that shouldn't be discussed in the open, we will certainly address those in a closed meeting. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I will just wrap this. I have one question and I'll move to comments. But in terms of the additions to planning, building, and engineering, are we foreseeing that those will be covered by the building permit fee increases in perpetuity, or do they expect to be annualized via taxation in year 2 for going forward?
Those revenues continue into the future.
Okay, great, thank you. So generally, I just want to say a huge thanks to staff for the revamped way of presenting this budget. I missed the last meeting when we talked about kind of the real estate facilities master plan and taking this longer term view. And I just want to say that I think the way that this has been presented is really, really helpful to me and answers a lot of the questions that I had previously had about kind of the long-term impacts of some of these decisions. So just to start off by saying thanks to staff for that. I am still, in terms of things I need for consideration when this comes back, obviously the public safety master plan will be discussed and that will help inform those earmarked positions. I had some questions around those, but happy to hold off. I still have a number of queries about the service level maintenance and increases in the building department in particular, and I'm just lacking some clarity on where that will leave us in terms of the number of plan reviewers versus I'm unclear if we're actually adding any planners and the impact that will have on our building permit time processing. So I think that we've done a really good job in this past year in terms of reducing our wait times. The numbers that Mr. Buxton showed are really favorable. And I'm just curious how much further the additional FTE, I think is what staff are suggesting, is that you're adding 1 FTE when you have the current staff that are on leave come back. But if I'm missing that, or I've misunderstood that, then I think some clarity is needed there in terms of how much further that will get us in terms of building permit review timelines and where this certified professional program will come in to support that as well. So those pieces need to be pulled apart for me. And just picking up on Councillor Pettingill's comments around the school zone center line sign maintenance, I too would be interested in maybe just broadening that line item to be a little bit less specific and more focused on speed reduction. I'm actually not sure where we have gotten to with the neighborhood speed reduction program and if that's a go or not. And if it is, then great, but if not, then as a result of provincial funding, maybe we need to reconsider that and how we can actually address it in our budget. So there's a piece there that I would like some further insight on so that we can make that line item as effective as possible. Thank you.
Ms. Glenday, is there any more information you can provide on number 2 to the public about what that translates into?
Yes, absolutely. Number 2 is titled the Strategic Leadership Structure. And I did some work earlier in the year around a business case, which I can speak to briefly here, is increasing our leadership structure and reconfiguring the portfolios of our general managers. So essentially, the proposal is to add a general manager to my team and build out the portfolios in such a way that we can catch up with and manage the workload that has increased with our community growth and set us up for a position, or set the organization up to continue to mature as the community grows. The projections are that we will continue to grow. Additionally, it adds more administration support for that leadership structure. So the dollar amounts that you see are for 2 positions. One would be to hire a new GM in the second quarter of next year, and then administrative support in the fourth quarter of next year, and then the annualization for both of those positions into 2023.
And does that add to our total number of GMs or?
The overall structure takes the, I'm trying to think what I can speak to here. It doesn't add to the general manager numbers, no, but what it does do is create a senior director role, so I'm shifting portfolios around. Thank you for that clarity. So it adds to the number of people reporting to me, but the actual number of GMs remains the same. And it's shifting portfolios around that currently report to 4 GMs. So I will have 5 direct reports with a senior director and 4 GMs. Thank you.
Council Pangol.
Yes, thanks. On it's sort of a combination question that community patrol officers in number 13 and the where is it here? There's a related item of visitor and camping coordinator, seasonal. There's been a lot of discussion. I think I previously asked a question if we had yet metrics on what amount of our efforts and enforcement and engagement and education ends up being for visitors versus people who are living in the community, possibly in a vehicle, or just the housing challenge, and sort of understanding where our resources are going and needed most. Do we have that understanding yet?
Through the chair, Councillor Pettingill, that will be brought forward in the report for the season ending, and we're just trying to, I guess, separate that data out in a fashion that we can bring it forward in our next report.
And if you can, sorry, just remind me when that report is coming?
At this point, it's tentatively scheduled for November.
November pre-decisions on budget or November post-decisions on budget?
I'll defer to Ms. Glenday on that.
For clarity, it will be coming for pre-decisions on budget.
Councilor Race?
Thank you. Just for further information, Public Service Master Plan, which has already been mentioned, but also just for the upcoming decisions, and thinking about the context of special projects, and this may be sort of staff may already be ahead of this. The other things we tend to focus on are things such as active transportation budget, paving budget, and contributions to capital, which we've been for the past 2 years on a schedule for, and just to confirm that, as well as for reserves on things like that. So that's the kind of background information I'll be looking for next time. Thank you.
Council, anything else, information that you'll need to make final decisions? Yep, go ahead, Councilor Hunter.
Thank you. There's been mention of a number of reports that are outstanding. So the Public Safety Master Plan and the I suppose the transit details. I'm curious about this parade support piece as well, and just I'd like some better understanding around that for next time, to understand where that came from and how sounded like it was a specific event from our discussion here today, rather than all of the community events where sometimes we see larger gatherings of people than that specific parade. So I'm curious about that piece. The school zone signage and line item sort of triggers that speed reduction overall conversation, and I'd like to have some more understanding on how those things interact, and if there should be some more budget there for the speed reduction overall. Around the visitors and camping coordinator position, which I understand we just covered that there's a report coming, it makes me think that there's still work to do around vehicle dwellers as well. And just I didn't see anything in here at all with next steps. So to me, this, as it looks here, without seeing the report on the effectiveness of the program so far has us repeating what we've done from a budgeting standpoint, and feels to me like there's more to do. So I'd like to understand that better, which maybe that we'll see that in the report, or we need to look to push further to positively impact that situation. But we'll save that for November, I think. Seems a bit late. It'll be June. Quickly. Anyways, thank you.
I'm looking forward to the upcoming presentation that's been mentioned by staff concerning the certified professional program, and not only specific to the budget proposals that we have before us, but for our ongoing efforts in improving processing time. This continues to be an issue for large projects, for diverse types of projects. I've talked to the project proponent the other day that is worried about missing a whole season of work because of processing issues, and there may be diverse types of factors involved there. But I've also been listening to presentations and people speaking about differences between municipalities in the Lower Mainland and the drivers and factors involved in differing times for processing for large mixed-use development projects. And so, in summary, I'm seeking to understand better the drivers behind those processing time factors, say for the large projects, and to what extent, for example, step 4 requirements are involved. I know that they're complex, but we should be thinking about this ongoing, these background factors, because we're making decisions that affect those background factors. Our green building goals and strategies are evolving, just like everywhere else. And we're making choices that may affect those factors significantly. And maybe we should be looking at a broader or longer term perspective. I don't know, but I suspect so. We're looking to add embodied carbon initiatives as per our Game Changer grant project in future. And so I'm looking for that opportunity, the Certified Professional Program presentation, to learn a little bit more about those background driving factors behind our processing times and what we're trying to cope with. Thank you.
Okay. I hope you've been taking good notes, Mr. Russell. But what I've got here in listening to my colleagues is, where did the parade support originate from? Local, regional, national. Transit buses. So in having buses in reserve, are those new versus used? Because I don't really want to lock us into more diesel buses for longer. So I'm hoping they're used. The TTP business case for those positions. And so I think what is not visible to the general public or council really is what the structure looked like during implementation. So how many staff were dedicated to this? How many consultants were in the building supporting this millions of dollars of implementation work? And then what it looks like afterwards when they were just maintaining it. And I think that would be a helpful visual for people to see just what resources got put into this over the last many years. And now what we feel maintains the system in perpetuity. And I think having that visibility so we can see how these positions fit in from implementation to maintenance is important. I noted that we didn't have the colors marked in yet for climate adaptation and mitigation, so that would be a great thing to include the next go round. People mentioned the signs in the middle of the road to slow speed versus other creative solutions. So should that budget be described more broadly in regards to just slowing speeds and doing what we need to do in that regard? Public safety master plan details, the summer visitor management plan, and details also related to people that live here full time but are not housed in buildings. The building permit positions versus processing times, and the certified professional program in terms of what the drivers of processing time are. I think that's everything I heard, unless You heard, and then Councillor Race mentioned just the additional drivers of going forward, which we'll cover in the general fund and the special operating projects. Did I miss anything, Councillor Bailey?
Just wanted to clarify on the parade support. I think it would be good to know where the request comes from, but it seems to me that the ask would nearly double what we typically spent on Canada Day. And so for me, that is an open question, especially in context of truth and reconciliation. What does all of that look like? So for me, that whole area raises a bunch of questions that I don't think we should be presuming right now.
All right. Mr. Russell, did I miss anything that you caught on your list?
I don't believe so, and I hope that I wasn't the only person jotting notes. So I'm pretty sure we both have a fairly comprehensive list, and we will return with answers soon.
Thank you. I'll echo Councillor Stoner that the way this was presented this year was really helpful. I really appreciate the changes and the added transparency and clarity of how we're presenting the different types of pressures on the budget. So kudos to you and the team for making that happen.
Thank you.
Okay. Council, so let's have a break until 2:20, and then I'll entertain a motion to close because we've got to finish that business. Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. So Council, we come back at 3:20. Sorry, not 2:20. 3:20. I just lost an hour of my life. We'll be in the closed link. Thank you.